Hello, everyone. Welcome to Grid Life Wrap Up NASCAR Cup Series Southern 500. Two-time winner, consecutive winner for Chase Briscoe. NTT INDYCAR Series, their season's over. What's the offseason going to mean, especially for Penske, because they were far from perfect. And Formula One, Dutch Grand Prix, does Oscar Piastri have one hand on that championship? Joe San Diego here, and with me we've got Tanner Smith from Pitbox Press, editor of the Pitbox Press, and of course Matthew White, who has his Southern 500 recap up on Grid Network TV, and Kobe Lambeth from Grid Tonight with us. A big thank you to our Patreon investors calling the show, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew, for investing into Grid Network each and every month. You too can invest into Grid Network through Patreon. Link in the video description take you to our Patreon website. From there, select a plan, invest in us each and every month, help us get to the track. We were very thrilled to have Nicole as well as a couple others join us at Portland International Raceway, and we're looking forward to 2026. And if you want to do a one-time investment, you could do a YouTube super chat or buy me a coffee. Really wish I had coffee yesterday because it's been a long weekend. We've been on the air now for 6 days, since last Wednesday, every day, and here we are on a Monday going back on the air again. And across social media at Grid Network TV, gridnetworktv.com. And of course, as I mentioned, Matthew Bro, not Matt White, Matthew Bro from Grid Network TV is here. So I still need a little bit more coffee. I got a little cup left, but that's about it. Gentlemen, let's get started with the Southern 500. It's no longer a throwback race, but watching that 19 car last night felt like a throwback from the dominant era of Martin Truex Jr. However, it was Chase Briscoe, by far having, in my opinion, one of his best races. Led 309 laps, swept the stages, and he only missed out on the fastest lap bonus point. Had he gotten that, oh my goodness, if he got in the pole, you could say, bring out the broom, sweep. Nobody had anything to really stop him. The driver that led the second most laps, I found this stat very shocking. John Hunter Nemechek with 15 laps, only 15. Tyler Reddick towards the end made it interesting, trying to get around him, including a last lap effort. Entering turn 3 went low, but the cars drifted up. Briscoe got away, got his win. Tanner, was this the most impressive win for Chase Briscoe? Is he a threat for the championship? I'll throw in there something else too. Is this the most impressive win for his crew chief as well?
I would definitely say it's the most impressive win for James Small, who I did malign on this broadcast yesterday, as not having been able to keep up with the track at Darlington before, even when he's created a dominant car for Martin Truex Jr. back in 2023. With that said, though, I kind of felt that the end of the race was going to play out exactly the way it played out when we had a pit stop with 50 laps to go and everybody took tires, so there wouldn't be any sort of tire stagger between any of the top drivers. Everybody had to fight with what they had. And at Darlington, unfortunately, considering it's a bit of a one-lane racetrack at times, it doesn't really play out the same way it would at somewhere like Homestead, where you can get off of the wall and run a different line and still make pace. So as far as it being impressive for Chase Briscoe, I didn't really feel that way. I felt that he and his team did execute, though, throughout the race better than everybody else, and that's obviously why they were able to go out there and win and in the fashion that they did. But I just felt that when it comes to Darlington in general, we saw this exact same performance out of the 24 team in the spring, and that was because a lot of the green flag pit stop opportunities got taken away by really dumb cautions. So it kind of played out similarly to me to the spring, except that we didn't get, that final caution until like 5 laps to go in the spring, whereas in yesterday's race, we had a caution come out with about 55 laps to go. So with all that in mind, it was honestly kind of frustrating watching the legacy cars and Tyler Reddick pull up to Briscoe's back bumper from 2 and 2.5 seconds back, and then, keep yo-yoing back and forth between being 3 and 6 tenths behind him. Because you could clearly tell, and anybody with eyeballs could see, that the 45 and the 43 and probably even the 42 were actually faster than the 19, but because of the prevalence of dirty air with the next-gen car, you just couldn't make a pass because of the track having so little in the way of available grooves to run. So all that to say, that's nothing to take away from Chase Briscoe. He raced with the car he was given, and he put on an extremely fantastic performance for he and the 19 Bass Pro team. And you got to hand it to him. I mean, going out and leading 300 laps, especially at the Southern 500, is no small feat. And he and the 19 team absolutely deserve their victory.
Yeah, without a doubt. If you do something that hasn't been done since Bobby Allison in 1971, leading over 300 laps in the Southern 500, that's pretty dang impressive. And they really did put belt to butt, I feel. But at the same time, I do agree with Tanner's point. I will say this is, without a doubt, Chase Briscoe's most impressive race, just because he was up front and just dominated literally the entire race. However, I do agree with Tanner. I think Chase Briscoe was probably the third or fourth fastest. I think if this might have been a different car, I could say that Tyler Reddick, even Eric Jones, and then even John Hunter Nemechek were faster in the long run. But every time it seemed like they had a run and got to him, they fell right back. So it was pretty impressive that they had the top three were all within, even the top four, I believe, were all within a second or less than a full second within each other coming to the finish. That's pretty cool, in my opinion. But would I say Chase Briscoe is a threat for the championship? Sure. I mean, I feel like just if he can be consistent, he has 11 top fives now, which I believe ties the Joe Gibbs Racing lead now with Denny Hamlin, who also has 11. I believe Bell has 10 or 9, and then Ty Gibbs is in a whole other – he's doing his own thing over there. But, yeah, so Chase Briscoe, I think if they can maintain a consistent pace, they should be able to do it. But then also if you go back to – I was looking at the stats. In the last 6 Darlington races, there has been a driver to lead at least 145 laps, and Briscoe is now the only one to actually win the race. So it kind of shows that if there was a late caution, it would have I don't think Briscoe would have been a top 4 finisher in this race. I think Reddick would have had a good restart. Or it's also because then you can argue against your own point, right? Because at the same time, Reddick had a better long-run car. Jones had a better long-run car. Nemechek did as well. But Briscoe could get off the line, and it was like he would just shoot out of a cannon. He'd be 1 to 2 seconds ahead within a couple laps. And then in the long runs, he just slowly faded back, and then still couldn't pass him. But no, he was a well-deserving performance. He deserves to make at least the round of 12. It wouldn't shock me if he went to the round of 8. I don't know if he's a Championship 4 contender. But it all depends on how the rest of these races stack up. So now he's got a little more confidence. He can relax these next 2 weeks, go out, prepare for some tracks that he's pretty good at in the round of 12.
Round of 12, he has to be pretty excited about it. His big excitement thing for him, though, is next 2 race weekends, he's not in a must-win. If he goes out there, gets wins, that's bonuses for him in that round 12 with those playoff points. A lot of pressure off him, James Small. I mean, overall, it's going to be very exciting to see how this team's going to perform in the round of 12. I think that's where they're going to be, again, really bringing everything down. One thing I found very interesting, I was listening to the teardown last night, and Briscoe was saying him and the team, they're not talking about the playoffs. They hardly talk about the playoffs. They just talk about each and every week trying to go out there and get the best result possible. Briscoe, flawless yesterday. His pit crew was flawless yesterday, and that was really key because we saw plenty of playoff drivers who were far from flawless. Josh Berry, lap 1, turn 2. Spun, finished last. He did claim the fastest lap bonus point. I'm really curious to see, is that going to be a factor if we're talking about just a 1 point by the end of this round? Alex Bowman, that pit crew had the most disastrous pit stop I have ever seen. I mean, I was listening to Joshua Birch. He played the Benny Hill theme song when that pit stop was going on and they were showing the replays. I just like, that best describes what we saw there with that disastrous pit stop. Bowman, he finished ahead of Shane Van Gisbergen by just one position. SVG pitted. A few laps later, here comes the caution. Trapped a lap down towards the end of the race. Christopher Bell, 29th. Contact on pit road. Denny Hamlin had mistakes on pit road, particularly with a bad pit stop from the pit crew. Austin Hill, 23rd. We knew the RCR team's not exactly top caliber, but I think the big egg everyone was talking about, William Byron, 21st. Just not exactly at all what we anticipate from a lot of these teams. But man, why does it seem that so many playoff teams make mistakes almost annually when the Southern 500 is that first race of the playoff?
It's a tough question, I feel, because you can argue that the Southern 500 is probably the most difficult race to prepare for in terms of how many tires you got to use, strategy. It could be a race where there's a caution every 20 laps, or it could be long green flag runs like we saw. And then at the same time, you start in the day, finish at night. It's a long race at one of the most difficult tracks as well. But I think I like it being the first race of the playoff too, because it shows that it pretty much shows that the playoffs are hard and you need to be on point. And it can show that one of the hardest tracks to start the playoffs, it could be a make or break for some of these teams. Obviously, you saw guys like Shane Van Gisbergen and even Chase Elliott's near the cut line, Christopher Bell, who had so many playoff points heading in. Chase Elliott didn't, but Bell did, as well as Van Gisbergen. And now they're near the cut line. And I think that's really crazy to say. But yeah, Alex Bowman with a 40-second pit stop was absolutely absurd. I remember messaging our Slack chat, like, what the heck is going on over there? The most interesting thing I saw is that the fact that Chase Briscoe had the second fastest lap was a 29.39. Josh Berry ran a 29.04. I don't know what they put in that car to finish 128 laps down after that wreck, but I wonder if he didn't bottom out on lap one, how fast Josh Berry could have been yesterday. But yeah, it just seems like this is a big like rust shaker, for a lack of better terminology. I hope you guys know what I mean. It's like you got to get ready for the playoffs, and having the most difficult race arguably in the playoffs to start it can kind of show what teams are built for this, because a playoff system really does benefit. It's not just the driver, it's the team. That's why a lot of people don't like the playoff, because most sports are all, it's a team, but you have not only the driver, like, so I guess if you're playing basketball, you have the specific person on the court, and maybe the coach is dictating how the game is going to perform. But in racing specifically, I'm going to go with NASCAR. Not only do you have the driver, but you have all 8 pit crew members or whatever. You have the crew chief, you have the people who built the car. There's so many things that go into it that if one thing goes wrong, it can screw you, for really a lack of a better term. Like Alex Bowman, he wasn't really running great. He didn't do that well in practice. He didn't qualify well. But to have a 40-second pit stop where just one error after another, granted, it could be the equipment, it could have been just the crew, just one mistake leading into another. But yeah, it's just, I guess, the atmosphere of the Southern 500 is the lights are on and they got a little too bright, almost like this, like turn them off. They were a little too bright there. So that's how I feel, and it's interesting to see now. I didn't expect much out of like Austin Dillon, but William Byron, I know Tanner has been saying that he could be a round of 12. Even he said Hendrick, and I want to give him props because Hendrick did not show up at all. And I can't wait to sit here and listen to Tanner talk about that, because they just didn't show up. And this is a team that had the top 3 in points for a lot of the season, and then Bowman was like 8th or 9th in points before it all reset. And then they just put out a stinker. I think Jonathan Field says something like only 4 times have they ever finished all outside the top 10 in the Southern 500, all Hendrick cars, and this was one of them. So maybe this was the 5th. But absolute stinker from Hendrick Motorsports, which worries you, because if they didn't, besides Larson, I think had a good race, even though he was still finished poorly, it kind of shows that the playoff points, it might reset and start well, but you have a day like Chase Elliott or a day like William Byron. William Byron's still pretty far ahead. But you have a day like Chase Elliott. Now he's going in the cut line, going into Gateway, a track that he just hasn't really performed too well at. I think he's more confident heading to Bristol, obviously. But with Gateway, it's like, what is Hendrick Motorsports going to do? What are they going to come out and do? So, yeah, that's my long point about that.
Yeah, so as far as some of the teams last night not really coming out and, hitting the base paths with speed, I feel like we see so many teams make mistakes here because of just Darlington in general. Like, I don't even think it has anything to do necessarily with the playoff opener, but I do think that does add that extra, 10% of, pressure on these teams. But everybody wants to win the crown jewels. Winning at Darlington, as I discussed in our intro yesterday, is, something that brings, immortality of some form to your career. I think that, especially winning the Southern 500, you're a certified badass for the rest of time, as far as I'm concerned. Pardon my language, but you go out and win the Southern 500, you are absolutely somebody that gets to carry that throughout the rest of your life. And I feel like with that in mind, all these teams, all these crew members getting, the ability to say the same thing, that hey, I won a Southern 500. That's always in the back of their mind. So they're trying to be perfect every pit stop, but they have that thought in the back of their mind rather than executing. And sometimes when you have that thought in the middle of a pit stop, you forget to plug in a pit gun, and then you forget to plug in the new pit gun. So you have things like Alex Bowman's pit stop come into play, which is not something we normally see out of Hendrick Motorsports. As far as some of the other names listed here, Christopher Bell, I can't really blame that on him necessarily. As far as he knows, when the jack drops, that's when he's supposed to leave, unless his spotter or crew chief tell him otherwise. So in my opinion, what happened with the 20 was absolutely a miscommunication by the 20 team to their driver. I think, honestly, something that the pit crews and NASCAR should explore is maybe having the pit crews have some form of a radio in their helmet. So that way, specifically the jackman I'm thinking of, the jackman can hold for an extra second or two and then, allow the car that's, probably pitting ahead of them to actually get into their stall. So we could avoid things like what happened last night, because I feel like what happened with Christopher Bell was totally avoidable. On top of that, you had Austin Dillon. I think it wasn't paid attention to enough, but he got into Ryan Blaney pretty hard. I feel like he had a pretty decent car up to that point in the race, but after that contact and what I would assume was a slower pit stop afterwards, the 3 team was never heard from again. William Byron, I don't know what happened, but I'll be honest with you guys, as soon as I saw that he's qualified 11th, I was like, oh, they're not going to be great tonight. I know I didn't really share that thought yesterday when we were talking about it, but I don't know. I just did not see the same, level of dominance from the 24 team that we saw in the spring, really right off the truck. And that's why I didn't include them in my fantasy lineup last night, and I'm really glad I didn't. But other than that, Byron finished, I think, behind his teammate Carl Larson, who had damage, and his other teammate Chase Elliott, who, prior to the final caution, was a lap down and received the lucky dog. So you have stuff like that happen where it's nothing really went wrong for your team all night necessarily, but you also didn't do anything right either. At times at Darlington, you've really got to step up. You've really got to perform at your max potential, and a lot of playoff teams last night left a lot of points on the table. SVG in particular. Stephen Doran, sir, I don't know what you were thinking with that strategy at Darlington of all places. I know your car didn't have a whole lot of speed, but it looked like Shane was getting a good bit out of the car last night. and you completely put him behind the 8-ball when you were on the lead lap. That made 0 sense, and I don't know why they did it. But now they've got to sit with that very uncomfortable 3 points to the cut line with Joey Logano, who has won at Gateway, Josh Berry driving a Penske car at Gateway, Alex Bowman, who is driving a Hendrick car, which, granted, at Gateway isn't exactly a guarantee, and then Austin Dillon, who his team has won at Gateway with his other teammate, but still, like, they're going into Gateway with a lot of question marks, especially since SVG's never driven there. So if I were the 88 team, I think that they need to get very creative next week in order to make sure that they have a decent enough buffer going into the finale of the first round at Bristol.
It'll be interesting to see how that's all going to shape up for the 88. And as you were saying, your answer, I display day in the live asked where was Shane Van Gisbergen had finished. Not that pit stop occurred. I mean, Matt, I think you best said behind backstage 24th, maybe 25th spot, but better than being trapped a lap down in the 30s.
Yeah, that's
already
right.
Finished 33rd, something like that.
30.
32nd.
Like, not a banner night for the Trackhouse team. No cars in the top 10. And I mean, Daniel Suarez, I think, got involved in that lap 1 accident, had tape all over his car. So I have to feel like maybe they just didn't have the pace after that. But Ross Chastain didn't even end up finishing in the top 10 late in that race after running 7th for much of the final run. He must have just burned his tires off.
Yeah, it was interesting to see that Trackhouse, nothing really going on, but I also have to say this, besides Trackhouse and Hendrick having nothing going on, Toyota had something going on. 6 cars in the top 10, and they led just about every lap, considering when you add the laps of Chase Briscoe, Danny Hamlin, and John Hunter Nemechek. When you look at the Chevrolet drivers that led laps, all combined, total 16 laps. Just one more lap more than what John Hunter Nemechek led last night. Chase Elliott with 8 laps. Shane Van Gisbergen, Ross Chastain both led 3 laps. Kyle Larson, 2 laps. Ford did not lead a lap in the Southern 500. Toyota swept Darlington. This is the second time they swept it since 2021. And since 2007, this is what I find very fascinating. Toyota has won at Darlington 12 times. Chevrolet 7 times, and Ford 6 wins. Tanner, is Darlington a track that Toyota could say is sort of their track? And is this really not an indicator that Toyota has a potential dominant force in the playoffs?
I can't say for sure if it's something they can claim as their own at this point, but last night obviously proved that they have the Southern 500 figured out at bare minimum. But if you look back at the last few races we've had here, had Kyle Larson not spun out in the spring, Ryan Blaney was going to take that win from a Toyota in a Ford. Prior to that, a Ford obviously won the Southern 500 with Briscoe and SHR last year. And, obviously he didn't have to race a Toyota to get there. He was racing against a Chevy with Kyle Busch. Beyond that, you look back at the spring race from last year, and I'm trying to remember who ended up winning that one. But regardless, in the next gen era, we've had, pretty much every manufacturer go out and win there. So, I mean, last night they obviously had something working well for them compared to the competition. But I think what's interesting is, Legacy Motor Club in particular, they don't have any affiliation with the other Toyota teams, 2311 and Joe Gibbs Racing. So I found it really fascinating that they were able to march from outside the, top 10 in qualifying and just ramp up to the front. Oh, thank you, Matthew. In our private chat, he reminded me that it was Brad Keselowski, another Ford. So, Yeah, I don't feel like either manufacturer really has like a true stranglehold on this racetrack. I think it kind of changes year to year, and some teams just manage to hit the setup more or less. Even going back to 2022, Joey Logano moved a Chevy out of the way to win that race. Toyota blew up in the fall, which allowed Eric Jones in a Chevy to win. And then the 2023 races were swept by the Hendrick cars of Byron and Larson. So, yeah, I feel like, in the next gen era, this track has kind of been more of a pendulum. Sometimes it swings your way, sometimes it doesn't. But I also just feel like this race didn't normally play out like a standard Darlington race where, we have either a rash of cautions at the end, so it's a tire battle mostly at the end of the event. Alternatively, we didn't have like a long green flag run to end the race. We had a 55 lap run to the finish, which, while fascinating in its own right, did kind of leave for a bit more of a stale ending compared to some of the other Southern 500s and Darlington races that we've seen in the past. So I wouldn't say that Toyota's necessarily got a stranglehold by any stretch. And as far as their ability to compete in the next 9 races, I think that they'll be strong at Gateway, but Bristol wasn't exactly a banner race for anybody but Denny Hamlin in the spring. Granted, as we all know, the spring race at Bristol and the night race at Bristol in the fall are completely different concepts. But as far as like how the rest of the playoffs really shape up for them, I don't know. I think that Darlington obviously is a very unique racetrack, and I don't think that you can really compare it to any of the other ones that are left in the playoffs outside of maybe Las Vegas in terms of length. But outside of that, there really aren't a whole lot of like traditional 1.5 mile or even like, traditional intermediate tracks left in the postseason. So outside of this in Kansas. So I think if you're looking for them to compete, throughout the rest of the playoffs, I think this is a strong indicator that they'll be good at the high banked tracks with, high tire degradation. But other than that, I can't really give them a vote of confidence without seeing how they perform at Gateway next week.
Yeah, on my end, I think it's a tough indicator to really put manufacturer. I remember I was running my mouth on one of these shows. It was either last year or 2 years ago about how there is no way we will ever see a Joe Gibbs car win a championship as long as it stays at Phoenix, because Joe Gibbs kept crapping the bed at Phoenix every time they went there. And then Toyota and Joe Gibbs proceeded to lead like 95 or 96% of that entire race. So I had to eat crow on that one. So, yeah, I think it's just all depends. And then you look at Kansas, right? There was a span where Toyota in 2311, it seemed like, or Joe Gibbs was winning every single time we went there, and then they haven't touched it since. And then, like, Chevrolet and Hendrick Motorsports, specifically Kyle Larson, took over that. So I think it's just one of those things where they got the setup right. They figured it out. They all had the qualifying pace, and they stayed up front, which, if you notice, Reddick and Briscoe were in the top 4 in qualifying. And then Bell was up there too, but he obviously had that incident on pit road. Hamlin was up there as well. Obviously, he had an incident on pit road, but he would have easily been contending up there as well. So, yeah, Toyota, like Tanner said, I think you have to look at those intermediates. I think you have to play into driver strength as well. Like on September 21st, I wouldn't be shocked if Christopher Bell wins New Hampshire. You know what I mean? It's like that's just like a track he's got figured out. I wouldn't doubt if Denny Hamlin wins one of these next 2 races, because I think he finishes in the top 5 at Gateway or Worldwide Technology Raceway or Bristol pretty much every time they go there in the playoffs, it seems like. So it could just be one of those things where Toyota got it right this time. And then there have been races this year too where even just a few weeks ago, I don't even think Toyota had a car in the top 12 or something along those lines, or one car in the top 12. So it just goes to show when you get it, you get it type of thing. So, yeah, for them, it's going to be interesting to see if they can carry that momentum. Obviously, the 2311 team, well, 2 of the 3 cars, the 2 playoff cars, I should say. I try not to forget about Riley Herbst, but he had a very interesting day as well. But Bubba and Reddick both finished, I believe, in the top 6, both led some laps. So it goes to show that a lot of the Toyota teams, specifically the Toyota playoff teams, have a lot of pace, and even the non-playoff teams that don't share the data with, like Legacy Motor Club. So, yeah, well, I guess we'll see, but it wouldn't shock me if Toyota went out and won a couple more races in this playoff. But at the same time, I don't think anyone has a set advantage at any track, unless I mean, looking at it, I guess the Roval, you could say Chevy just because they have Shane Van Gisbergen, but all the other tracks, I don't really think there's a head start for any team.
Yeah, and before Joe takes over, I just wanted to cut back in because I know we were talking about Chase Briscoe earlier and like what his possible chances are to contend for a title. And, you know, looking back at all of the playoff openers since 2014 when we started the playoff format with eliminations and such, we've only had one driver not at least make the round of 8 after winning the playoff opener, and it was Truex back in 2016 when he blew up at Talladega, which was at the time a cutoff race. Since we moved to the playoff points era in 2017, we've had 2 drivers win the playoff opener and the championship, which was Truex the next year in 2017 and Joey Logano last year. We also had another outlier in that time, Eric Jones in 2022, won the playoff opener, Southern 500, and he was not a playoff driver at all. But everybody else since 2017 has either made the round of 8 or the championship for it. So if you're betting on Briscoe to make a deep run, you're probably in luck right now.
That is a very interesting trend, so it'll be interesting to see how Briscoe does. In the chat room, we got a couple to get caught up on, starting with a Dana. I see a Hendrick, Penske, and a Trackhouse team eliminated after the round, and Austin Dillon. Will be interesting.
Are we counting Josh Berry as a Penske?
That's what I was thinking. If it was that was to happen, I would say it would be Berry, Bowman, SVG, and Dillon. So it'd be interesting
I don't feel unconfident in my picks for first round exits.
Yeah.
Amber, Toyota sweeps the first round. That would be. I mean, Denny Hamlin has won a. Correct me if I'm wrong. He's won a Gateway. No, he hasn't.
He's never even been good at Gateway either.
I thought he finished second, didn't he?
No, you're thinking of Kyle Busch when he was still with Gibbs.
Maybe, yeah, probably.
Okay, that's what.
And Bell ran really well there last year, and then his engine started going out with like 10 to go out of nowhere.
That might have been where I thought Toyota. Yeah, that'll be interesting to see. Were you surprised to see Michael Jordan at Darlington?
Didn't his shirt say something like, "If you see me coming," like on the back? I wasn't surprised to see him there. He still loves the sport. He still, he still owns the race team. He, wants to go see his team compete. And Darlington clearly was a great way to show that. I mean, they had 2 guys in the top 6, and I think had there been like 2 or 3 more laps, Bubba probably gets by Allmendinger to make it 5 Toyotas in the top 5.
Yeah, I feel he really shows he loves the sport of stock car racing. He loves the history of the sport. Everything about it is just the management from the organization. That's where the beef is, and of course, the pending lawsuit and everything going on. Let's switch over to some of the non-playoff drivers and some of the notable drivers that are not in the playoffs but had strong finishes. I know one person you already mentioned, Tanner, was AJ Allmendinger, the highest finish in Chevrolet in 5th. Kyle Busch, the next one, and then Legacy Motor Club. What an effort from them. 2 top 5s. Eric Jones, John Hunter Nemechek. I mean, for John Hunter Nemechek, I know it's only 15 laps, but to say, hey, I led the second most laps in the Southern 500, that's something you could talk about. And then AJ Allmendinger, as I mentioned, Kyle Busch, Carson Hocevar in 9th. Those were your Chevrolets in the top 10. Chris Buescher, the highest finishing Ford, in 10th, missing out on the playoffs again. So, Matt, how did these drivers race their way into the top 10? Because earlier we saw all the playoff drivers in the top 10, but then it seemed like, especially Allmendinger Legacy Motor Club, came out of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, also with Tanner, we're joking backstage. That's why I'm giggling. Denny did finish second in the last 2 Gateway races. So
I completely memory hold that. Jesus.
It was quiet. He wasn't like, he didn't run like terribly or great, pretty much. He just kind of got in there at the end. But I just wanted to bust his balls about that because we're joking. But yeah, for them to race their way in the top 10, I think it was interesting because Buescher seemed like Hocevar kept getting into him multiple times. Those two didn't seem. It seemed like Hocevar hit everything except the pace car. It seems like that's a Days of Thunder reference there. But yeah, Hocevar finishing 9th from saying he had the worst car absolutely possible that he's ever driven in his life, and then to go to one of the hardest tracks and finish 9th. That was pretty interesting. So I'm going in reverse order here. Buescher finishing 10th. Doesn't surprise me that he was one of the best Fords there, just because Chris Buescher, I still feel like if he got in the playoffs, he could have been a threat. And then Kyle Busch, I think Cheddar's just announced like last week that every time Kyle Busch finishes in the top 8, if you go to Cheddar's, you get like free chips or quesos or something like that. So I think he wheeled the hell out of that car to get it to 8th so everyone can enjoy Cheddar. So that's great marketing, great sponsorship opportunity for Kyle Busch there. But then looking at AJ Allmendinger too, I feel like we have to tip our cap to him. He doesn't get enough credit for being good on tracks where you have to ride the wall and be up high. He does really well at Homestead, and he did really well finishing 5th. I know Tanner said, I think Bubba, if you gave him a couple more laps, could have probably gotten to him. Sure, and it would have been cool for Toyota sweeping the top 5. But I give my credit where it's due with Allmendinger, since Ty Dillon was like multiple laps down or something in like 30th. So for that, yeah. But then really want to touch on that Jones boy and then John Hunter Nemechek, because what a absolute incredible performance by that team, especially since Tanner alluded to earlier. Even Denny said in his post-race, it was great for a team that they don't share data with. So could you imagine if Toyota actually shared data with the Jimmy Johnson co-owned team? I think Eric Jones, it's different though, because I feel like if when a new manufacturer comes in, it could be possible, or whether how the lawsuit plays out for 2311, that someone could jump ship to Honda or Dodge or Ram or whomever. But so it's good that Jimmy Johnson, is building up that organization, doing their own stuff. But Eric Jones back in with same data as these Joe Gibbs racing drivers, I really think could have been a threat all season, not just at some tracks what he's really good at. So yeah, I think it was Eric Jones' first back-to-back top 5 since like September, October of 2020, which is insane considering I'm still very confident Eric Jones can figure it out if he's given the right equipment. And then John Hunter Nemechek, I mean, his best career finish in the NASCAR Cup Series. Took him 92 tries to finish better than 5th, but he did it. So now I'm surprised he only has 92 starts. I forget how young he is, but then his career when he jumped up the Cup too early, then went back to trucks, kicked butt, Xfinity kicked butt, and then came up the Cup again. But yeah, I think they deserve the biggest tip of the caps. I think I'd argue that Eric Jones and John Hunter Nemechek running 3rd and 4th is more impressive than Tyler Reddick and Bubba Wallace running 2nd and 6th in their equipment, just because of the atmosphere. And then obviously when you're a 3rd-tier team at Toyota, to be able to do that, it says a lot. And they said something like first time in the history of Toyota where they had swept the top 3 with 3 different teams. And then even if you count they had 6 of the top 7, and they had 3 different teams represented twice in that too, which again, awesome. So shout out to them with that. But yeah, how do these drivers do it though? To end my point, I don't. You got to show up. If you notice those drivers we mentioned, besides maybe Hocevar, there wasn't really a lot of Eric Jones pit road issues. There wasn't John Hunter Nemechek issues. There wasn't. Hocevar, I mean, I don't know how the hell he got up to 9th. He was wheeling it. Buescher hit the wall though too, but Kyle Busch was very quiet, was involved in that lap 1 incident with Barry, and then just made his way back up through the field. But hey, I don't know if that pit stop went faster for Eric Jones or John Hunter Nemechek, which Eric Jones said, if you read my story on gridnetworktv.com, one of the first things Eric Jones said when they asked what more you could have done, and he said something along the lines of having a faster pit stop or getting out before the other guys. I think this could have been a completely different race. You saw Ryan Blaney lost the last race here by having a slow pit stop. So Eric Jones, if he had a faster one, I think we would have been playing the tune that he earned his second, third, and fourth career wins at Darlington, all 3 years apart, 2019, 22, and 25. But unfortunately, sometimes things don't happen like that. So, yeah, that's my long point. They all had great races, so you have to give them credit.
All right, Mr. Numerology over there. Let me spin a yarn for y'all. So we'll start with the lowest finisher here, Chris Buescher. Looked like he was probably about an 11th to 15th place car all night, and when a top 10 car finally fell out of the top 10 at the very end of the race and Ross Chastain, Buescher was there to pick up the crumbs and take 10th. I don't think he was the best Ford, but unfortunately after Ryan Blaney got damaged in that accident with Austin Dillon and Kyle Busch, that pretty much ended Blaney's night, which honestly you could probably extend that even further to the Hocevar spin on the track and the subsequent collision with Christopher Bell on that same pit cycle during the yellow, as stopping in front of Blaney kind of prevented him from getting out at the appropriate time. Carson Hocevar, driving the worst effing race car he'd ever driven, his words, not mine, was able to reclaim some glory for Chevy, as clearly the parent organization there in Hendrick Motorsports clearly failed to show up tonight or last night. Then you look at Kyle Busch, who, as was noted in our previous panelists' argument, was involved in that lap 1 incident with Josh Berry, received some damage, had to get some tape on that Morgan & Morgan car. And I genuinely think Kyle Busch drove to the top 10 out of pure spite. He hated his race car, hated everything that was happening, and he just drove it out of pure talent and spite. Now, as far as AJ Allmendinger is concerned, Matthew very eloquently pointed out that Allmendinger has a penchant for running well at these kinds of tracks where tire degradation is at a massive premium. And I don't think that it's any surprise to anybody that Ty Norris coming to this organization and them having kind of an uptick in performance at those style of tracks is a coincidence. I think that Kaulig Racing having these strong runs is going to help them build in the future, and it's going to help RCR as well. I feel like, when Trackhouse is kind of dropping the ball in terms of performance, I feel like Kaulig is the Chevy team that's, aligned with Richard Childress Racing that's, scooping it up and taking it further. So that could be something for the second-tier Chevy teams to kind of build upon. And then you look at Legacy. They're the story of the night, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, you could talk about Briscoe leading 300-some laps. That was impressive, but John Hunter Nemechek and Eric Jones absolutely put on a clinic last night that, unfortunately, they're not going to get rewarded with. I think that had they had a better pit crew, they probably win this race, and probably by multiple seconds. And it'll probably be between those two at the end of the event. But unfortunately, as I displayed in an earlier question, it's really hard to pass at Darlington when you don't have another car ahead of you. So honestly, in that last run, I was kind of just hoping Chase Briscoe would probably just hit some lap traffic so we could actually get some excitement in the race, and it just never ended up happening. So I think that, Eric Jones and John Hunter losing spots literally every single pit sequence ultimately did them in. And it was just really unfortunate because I think that would have been an amazing story had Eric or John Hunter been able to pull it off. But it's definitely something for that Legacy Motor Club team to build on. I think that we expected them to have speed here in the spring that I don't feel like they really had. I think Eric was able to rise up to, I think, a top 10, but I'm not exactly positive on that. In addition to that, John Hunter has had a good run here before in 2020, the first race coming back from the pandemic disruption. John Hunter in a front row car was able to pilot his car to a top 10 out of genuinely nowhere. Like, nobody had any expectations for John Hunter in that car. So I think that it was really emblematic of a Legacy Motor Club team that we've seen have these strong runs throughout the season, really start to put it on when it matters most. And I think going into next season, they'll be, probably fighting for playoff spots and maybe a couple wins here and there. I think that they showed a lot of speed here, Texas, and at the Coca-Cola 600. And it's really strange to me. I feel like, we all kind of laughed and giggled last year when Jimmy Johnson was like, I'm out here for data, trying to get my team better. And he was finishing 31st, 7 laps down. We all laughed and giggled about that, but the results speak for themselves. At the tracks that he ran at, Legacy Motor Club has been exceptionally better than where they were last year. And I think with another data set ahead of them, from this season, they'll be able to optimize their performance even more and possibly go out and start stealing some top 10s and top 5s more frequently. So you've really got to tip your cap to Legacy Motor Club and what they've been building over there. I know it probably seemed nebulous and weird last year when they were running 30th and not doing anything, but if you looked at the people they hired, they got a lot of great minds in the building now, and they're looking to really raise their ceiling and maybe strike in a new legacy going forward.
Go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say, hey, I know there's rumors that Jimmy Johnson's trying to get a third charter. Imagine bringing another young and up-and-coming Toyota driver or currently non-Toyota driver from rumors you hear. If they can get that charter, imagine how cool Legacy will be. And then even Toyota, like you said, if Jimmy Johnson did what he needed to do, built the data up, and he didn't care. What more does Jimmy Johnson have to prove? Nothing at all. But now he's got to go out and try to win as an owner, which, he finished third in the Daytona 500. We quickly forget about that. But for them, if they get another charter, depending on, we're going to do the theoretical that 2311 still exists but next year. They would have, 10 Toyota cars out of however many charters there are. So it would really be interesting to see what this team can build on. And like Tanner had said, they keep getting better. And then I think we don't give John Hunter Nemechek enough credit for being as decent as he's been, or you could say good, I would argue. Because granted, I think Nemechek could go down to Xfinity if he was in Gibbs equipment, become like the next Justin Allgaier. I think he could win a bunch of races, win championships over the course of his career because he's still young. But he's at the top level, and he's doing stuff he's never done. I believe he has more top 5s and top 10s combined this season than he had previously in his entire Cup career. So it kind of shows that this team is really trending forward. And I think as a fan of the sport, seeing a third-tier team, arguably from a manufacturer, trend this far upwards, it's really fun to see. That's all I wanted to add before I interrupted you, Joe.
Not a problem. In the chat room, before we switch away from NASCAR, Amber, free shutters, go Rowdy, win Worldwide Technology Raceway. And you were saying, Matt, it's free chips and queso since you finished A. So if we have a Shedders near you, check that out. And then Day in Life, don't pull a Lee Corso Houston moment. I'm guessing that
what the helmets or do you know how Lee is it Lee?
Yeah, he just retired.
I'm just trying to remember which moment in particular A Day in the Life is referencing here. I'm gonna have to look into that.
Hopefully, he can reply and let us know on the chat room.
Definitely be interesting to see how this next race at Gateway.
It was from what he said, the F word.
Oh,
he went F it, and then threw the SMU mascot head aside, and then put the Cougar on instead.
That must be from when you were talking about what Carson Hocevar said about the car, then I assume so. But yeah, it's lots going on with NASCAR. Gateway, that's going to be a lot of fun before we get into IndyCar, Matthew, we'll give you an opportunity to share your shining moments. What was your shining moment from this week's weekend?
Yeah, I'll let you guys do the IndyCar ones, and I think if I do one from each quick, I think IndyCar, besides Josef Newgarden, obviously, I think Palou having his worst stretch was him going winless in 3 races and still finishing second and third in all those races. I think that was just the whole IndyCar season in general. He would have finished second in the championship standings if he only ran the road courses, considering he won on some of the ovals. Says a lot about how good he was. But I think for me, you'd have to say, I'm not going to specify any specific, but I'm just going to say Toyota in general. I hope if you guys have that as well, you can go a little more in depth than I will. But yeah, I got the press release from Toyota. They said the first time in history they had, like I had mentioned, for 3 different drivers in the top 3 from 3 different teams. First time in history. And then they mentioned it is with John Hunter Nemechek finishing 4th. It was the 3rd top 4 sweep in Toyota Cup Series history. The last time they did that was 2017 at Watkins Glen and the 2nd Bristol race. Both in 2017 they did it. What happened in 2017, might you ask, in the championship? Well, Toyota had Martin Truex winning and Kyle Busch finishing 2nd. So a lot of Toyota power. So if you're a Toyota fan of any of the guys in the playoffs, maybe you could be a little more confident if history does repeat itself. So that's pretty much what I got to say with my one shiny moment. Can't wait to hear you guys about IndyCar and Formula One. Some interesting races over on that end as well.
2017 is when they had 6 Toyotas in the field too, so it was very unlikely. Now they got 9, so they got better shots at doing that more often.
9 Toyotas in the field, and of course, plenty of racing ahead for them. Thank you so much for your time, Matthew Brown. We encourage everyone to visit Grid Network TV. Article from the Southern 500 is up. We'll bring in Kobe Lambeth because Nashville Superspeedway, IndyCar, Music City Grand Prix, and a popular winner for everyone that likes to see a hometown, home state winner take the checker flag.
Yes, that's right, John. We'll see you next time, Matthew. Now let's get into IndyCar. The NTT IndyCar Series season came to a close, and there was a race that really showed how good oval racing can be in IndyCar. Pato O'Ward looks set to dominate the Music City Grand Prix, but a tire failure took him out when his tire blew out and into the wall. He wasn't the only one with a right front tire failure. Alex Palou had the same issue, but in Palou fashion, seriously, how lucky can this guy get? Palou was able to get to the pits immediately, and he recovered to finish on the podium, was in contention for the win at the end. And Palou and O'Ward were side by side, lap after lap, battling for the lead early on. Really excellent driving from those two, because we've seen time and time again on ovals in IndyCar where that's gone terribly wrong, but they did a good job, racing with respect, but racing hard. Yeah, we saw plenty of side by side racing throughout the field, especially after the restarts throughout the day, and we saw a lot of comers and goers from Will Power to Colton Herta, Scott McLaughlin, Palou, and the eventual race winner Josef Newgarden, who got his one and only win of the year at home. Plus, also a good-sized crowd for IndyCar standards at the Nashville season finale. Tanner, do you think this was the best oval race of the 2025 season? Did IndyCar save the best for last?
I'd have to say so. And I think that, racing on a track with a little bit of banking on it definitely helped make the racing a little bit more interesting than I feel like it tends to be at times. I felt that Iowa might be better this year after a year on that new strip of pavement that they put around the turns. But unfortunately, I just still feel like it kind of left a little bit to be desired from what it used to be able to hold there at Iowa. But at the same time, Milwaukee last week was an exceptional exhibition of what tires can really do at the end of these oval races. And watching Christian Rasmussen, blast through the pack there at the end of the race and battle Palou side by side for a few laps was really spellbinding. And, I thought I had all the makings of the best race of the year. But then we go to Nashville, and I got to tell you, that was one of the best IndyCar oval races I've probably ever watched. And I felt that you never really knew who was going to win throughout the entire event. Obviously, you saw, Pato O'Ward, get hit by a blue shell, to borrow from Mario Kart, lose the race that way. It was a tremendous way to, lose out on that event, especially after he had pretty much dominated it to that point. And also, can I just say, I know I've dunked on Fox a lot for their NASCAR and IndyCar coverage this year, but I got to give them some credit where it's due. That was an exceptional bit of camera work to catch Pato O'Ward's tire starting to rip apart as he was fading up the racetrack before he hit the wall. So that way the fans at home knew exactly what the diagnosis was for Pato before, we obviously heard it from the man himself. But in addition to that, you had Will Power, who was leading at certain points. And unfortunately, he kind of lost the race himself because he slid through his box and had a pretty miserable pit stop, somewhat comparable to Alex Bowman's from later in the night. Then you had Scott McLaughlin leading late, and all of a sudden his tires just don't grip up. And I think that might have had something to do with him having the softer compound towards the end of that race on that old abrasive concrete surface. I felt that may have been part of why that happened. And then they threw the caution for McLaughlin after he barely kissed the wall and kept it going straight down the backstretch. Did not make any sense to me. And I am just so thankful that next year we're going to have a different officiating body behind the series. It can't come fast enough. But, watching the end of that race with, strangely enough, I believe Marcus Armstrong just chilling in front of the leaders, I still think it made for a very interesting ending to the race. And watching McLaughlin and Newgarden navigate around Palou on the outside where it was very sketchy, especially through turns 3 and 4, was very interesting to watch. With how the final restart played out with about 10 laps to go, I didn't feel like the race ever had like a true conclusion to it until we saw the checkered flag fly. So I think it had all the makings for an instant classic for IndyCar, and it was a really good note for them to leave on exiting the season.
This was a really great race. To add to that, saw a great crowd out there at the racetrack. I thought it just really showed that if you bring the crowd, you bring a good race, this is great TV stuff. And I have to echo with what you said about the camera work. For all the learning curves Fox had this year, being their first year with IndyCar, hopefully they can improve and have something even better next year. Because I felt not only was this probably the best oval race of 2025, because it had a little bit of everything. You had a dominant driver who just unfortunately through mechanical issues in the tire was out of the race. We saw plenty of side-by-side racing. We saw plenty of action. As you said, Tanner, it almost felt like we didn't know who was going to win. It wasn't because it was so chaotic and we had caution flag after caution flag, restart after restart, crash after crash. It was just everybody had their moments where they were able to drive towards the front. Colton Herta, everyone, I thought this was just a thrilling race. Great way to end the season and hopefully bring some positive momentum to the series for next year. The way this season had been, all the positive momentum of Fox coming in, more higher ratings. The way the season went, I know some people felt like it was just sort of dominated, maybe have lost interest. Hopefully this rekindle some of that interest for a lot of folks out there that, hey, IndyCar, the ovals, great product. IndyCar in general, great racing product. It's a very long off season, but we cannot wait to see that season released for 2026. I think you're going to have a wonderful 2026 season because I think a lot of people are going to be more excited to see what happens next year in the NTT IndyCar series.
Yeah, and I certainly have to tip my hat to IndyCar and all the teams for finally figuring out this hybrid engine. We now have an engine that doesn't hamper the on-track product. And the race we saw yesterday, it reminds me of the IndyCar racing on ovals that we all know and love, because if this had happened, like a year ago, you probably see the cars, stuck in the dirty air, not been able to do anything. It was really nice to see them, be able to run side by side and pass at Nashville. And I just thought the race was really, really good. I remember watching Pato and Palou going side by side, lap after lap, Joe Tanner, and I could not take my eyes off the screen because, to the average person who doesn't know, who doesn't understand, IndyCar racing or what IndyCar racing was like, they have no idea how terrifying that is in an IndyCar to watch two guys go side by side, lap after lap. And I was really worried, in that bump, entering turn 4, we saw it a few times, where a driver, go on a bump and they just shoot straight up the track. I was really worried, when Palou was on the outside, Pato was on the inside. I was really worried that Pato was going to hit that bump, go up in the Palou, and then we see a massive accident. Yeah, just crazy, just mere inches from disaster. That's what makes, IndyCar oval racing, such a spectacle. And I feel like that's exactly what we saw yesterday, quite a spectacle. And, a really good on-track product. And, given all the things, that was going on in IndyCar earlier this year, that left a sour taste in people's mouth, I think they certainly saved their best for last. And definitely riding a high into the off season after a great race yesterday. And also showed, just because the championship was wrapped up, a few races early, there was still a lot to race for. I know some people think, if you wrap up the championship early, then people are not going to be interested. But I thought yesterday was a very compelling race because you truly had no idea who was going to win with, as I mentioned, with all the comers and goers. And then some of the crazy things that was happening, throughout this race. I just thought it was, just really, really good. And definitely have to tip your hat to everyone involved for a solid ending to the season. And Dan and Life says it was a wonderful race in Nashville, better than the street course. Yeah, definitely have to agree with that. I mean, from a visual standpoint, really like the street course from that. But, unfortunately, for reasons, with the Titan Stadium being built, the new Titan Stadium in the NFL coming along, they no longer could do the Nashville street course, but Nashville was the next best bet. So I'm really happy we had another oval on the schedule. And I think that we need to end the season on an oval moving forward instead of at a road course or a street course. And Nashville seems like it's the perfect track for that. But I do wonder in the future, well, actually probably would not be able to do it unless they end the season maybe a week or two earlier. It would be really nice to see this in like Saturday night under the lights or something, or even Sunday night under the lights. I think that would be, even better to see an IndyCar night race in the season. But for what we had yesterday, that was pretty good. And of course, everyone knew Alex Palou was going to celebrate with the Astor Cup after clinching the title at Portland. But the Rookie of the Year battle came down to the very end, and Louis Foster got the honors. However, he was involved in a really questionable move that took out David Malukas. IndyCar handed Foster a drive-through penalty for blocking, and Malukas was taken to a nearby hospital. And Malukas later posted on social media that he was okay. A penalty for Robert Schwartzman for blocking as Antonio Ferrucci took him out of the Rookie of the Year race with just a few laps to go. And Joe, start with you on this. Well, what are your thoughts on Louis Foster's Rookie Year and his move on Malukas?
I'll start with the move on David Malukas. That was not a smart move. I think that was a well-earned penalty for Louis Foster. You're a lap down. Here comes a car on the lead lap, and you make that move from being on the low side to all of a sudden, I'm going to move up high, try to push you up as we enter turn 1, try to get back low, and then mayhem. It was just one of those deals that was really unnecessary. This wasn't two cars on the lead lap racing for the win. And, of course, it gets a little bit more scary when the fact is we were told David Malukas was medevac to a local hospital. That penalty, I think, really made the point clear to Louis Foster. I'm hopeful Louis recognized that was a really not a smart move and learns from it. For his rookie season, there were some ups. The pole he got earlier in that year, great. The fact that he's with Ray Hall, Letterman, Lanigan, they're still not exactly there when it comes to running towards the front. He had some good races here and there. He's had some scary moments. We remember what happened in Detroit, him and Felix Rosenquist. Then, of course, what happened in Gateway. I'm hopeful he really has learned from those mistakes and is going to be a much better driver. Because I think what some people are going to remember him is, oh, it's Louis Foster, the guy that had 2 big crashes at this moment, and he won Rookie of the Year because of a penalty to Robert Schwartzman. I think that's a little bit misleading. Yes, everyone's talking about Robert getting that pole at Indianapolis Motor Speedway for the Indy 500. But there's not really a whole lot you could talk about this season when it comes to accomplishments. Where with Louis Foster, I'm hopeful his accomplishments are not overshadowed by mistakes. I can't fault anyone saying that's sort of a fair perspective. Someone's just going to remember the mistakes more than the accomplishments. But Louis Foster, from what we've seen at Indy Next and his road to Indy career, he has potential. I just think with the team he's in, he's probably pushing it too hard. He's a rookie. Rookies are bound to make mistakes. If he cleans it up next year, I think he could be a better driver and hopefully better results.
I'm actually going to take that in the other direction, Joe. I think that what Robert Schwartzman was able to accomplish this season was actually rather impressive. Louis Foster spent 2 years in the NXT series, and ultimately it looks like he became a champion in that last year, which, very impressive. Nothing to take away from that. But he also came on board with a completely, legacy team that has been in the sport for decades now and had, alliances with major teams, has built up infrastructure, all this good stuff. Whereas Robert Schwartzman comes into the season uncharted, never driven an IndyCar before, and, is, bringing along a team that, again, hasn't competed at this level before at the NXT level or an IndyCar period. And he earned 2 top 10s this year and the pole in the Indianapolis 500. How is it that he loses a title of Rookie of the Year to a guy that never scored a top 10 this year, even in the race that he got a pole at in Road America, is beyond me. Like, I get that this is probably some formula that they use to, kind of determine this kind of stuff. But I will say the same thing that I said about Jimmy Johnson losing Rookie of the Year to Ryan Newman back in 2002 in the NASCAR Cup Series. It's just bull. Like, I get that, we weigh certain accomplishments a certain way, but winning the pole at the Indianapolis 500 in your first start on an oval, and you get 2 top 10s on the year that you don't see out of anybody else, it's just absurd that Foster ends up with the title because of something silly like a block. But at the end of the day, I do think Schwartzman should have been penalized for that block, but I just think the fact that it came down to that is kind of silly. Like, I feel like of any of the rookies this season, Robert Schwartzman absolutely accomplished more than Louis Foster did, and it's a shame that he's not going to go home with the Rookie of the Year in the NTT IndyCar Series. Now, moving on to Foster's move on David Malukas, dangerous and stupid. And it's unfortunately not the first time we've seen this out of Louis Foster this year. Had he just kept his car against the wall at Gateway and not, spun himself out trying to get off of it, Josef Newgarden probably doesn't go flying into the air. On top of that, you have what happened yesterday, which is just completely indefensible. You're a lap down car racing a car in the top 3 that is on the lead lap, like you're racing for position late in the race, and it's like lap 120. Like, what are we doing here? Like, why are you throwing a late block going into the corner and then not allowing the car on the lead lap to have their line? Just makes genuinely no sense. I'll be honest, that entire incident completely frustrated me, and I honestly wished IndyCar would have just parked Louis Foster for that incident. Like, I felt that the drive-through wasn't enough, because this isn't the first time that he's done something kind of silly this year to, wreck out another competitor on the lead lap. Again, I can't stress that enough. A lap down car wrecking a lead lap car. So I honestly just felt that for Foster's experience level, especially at an oval where, again, he was in the NXT series for 2 years, it just does not make any sense that he did that. And I really wish he had faced a little bit stiffer consequences, but unfortunately that is not what happened.
Yeah, it was real disappointing to see that move, on David Malukas there. I wish Louis Foster had been more mindful of his surroundings there. Yeah, and you're right, Tanner. It made no sense for him to be racing Malukas at Harka. Malukas, if it wasn't for that incident, he probably would have been up there battling for his first career win in the IndyCar series. At the end, real unfortunate that his race ended, in the way that it did. And as you guys been saying, hopefully Louis Foster is able to learn from that incident, and we can see him improve from it. And then the life says that you became a big Robert Schwartzman fan at Indy after he won the pole. Yes, that was one of the ultimate feel good stories of this year's IndyCar season, because Prima Racing, if you flash all the way back to mid in life, you watched our programs. Anyone who watched our programs, when we were talking about who could potentially be in danger of the last row shootout, we said both Prima cars. I said there's no way but Prima, an uncharted team struggling. They were really struggling at first. Remember the first day, I think they barely got out on the racetrack. It was not good. Prima looked completely unprepared, and it was just, it was just looked like a dumpster fire. And then to come out there, and put Robert Schwartzman, in the pole shootout and win the pole, it was a complete shock, because Prima, they have a lot of experience on road and street course all over the world, but no ovals. This is the very first time this team had ever been on an oval track in their life. But luckily they had, a lot of IndyCar experience on the personnel side, to put Robert Schwartzman in that position to win the pole as a rookie, first one since Keel Fabi did, a few decades ago. That was certainly a real special moment for Robert. And I think he has a rookie season to be proud of. And if he was in a better car this year, I think Robert would have shown a lot more, because this guy, he's F1 caliber. It was just, timing and seats and, and funding, which really prevented him from going to F1. But Robert Schwartzman, if F1 teams held him in very high regard, it just wasn't meant to be for him. But moving back on Louis Foster's, rookie season and what he did to Malukas, like Joe said, I think some highs and lows for Louis Foster. Highs obviously what a pole at Road America, and also in some races he showed some potential running well, but the thing that really got Louis Foster is execution was not really the best, and that's something him and that number 45 team have to work on in 2026, assuming that he's going to return to the car. I don't see no reason why he wouldn't. Yeah, because we saw him, tear it up in the next series last year. He won a lot of races, finished on the podium in about every race besides maybe one or two of them. And Louis Foster, he looked like he was going to be, one of the next best things in the IndyCar series. And I think maybe some of the things slowed him down this year. Obviously, been a rookie in this series, then Ray Hall led him in Lanigan Racing. That program is, so hit or miss, and most of the time it's miss. So I think the car could be slowing him down, in that regard. But, stuff yesterday, what we saw at Nashville had nothing to do with the car, just a lack of awareness there. But, he is a rookie. So I really hope that he'll be able to, take all the lessons from a tough rookie year. I know he finished, I believe, outside the top 20 in points. And I'm sure this year was a very humbling experience for him, going from being the man in the Indy Next Series, dominating the competition last year, to, I guess you go from hero to zero in a year span, because it just shows how competitive this IndyCar series is. And also, if you look at history, just because you dominate the Indy Next Series, that doesn't guarantee, you success in the IndyCar series, because, sometimes it just doesn't translate over. You get put in a difficult position where it's just not going to work out. And just to summarize, that Louis just has a lot to learn after, an up and down rookie year. And definitely has to learn from the incident yesterday at Nashville. And now moving on, Josef Newgarden. Let's talk about him. I know last week we had a question about him being the Oval Master, and if he's still the Oval Master. But after that win in Nashville, I think it is clear to say that he is still, one of the Oval Masters of the series. And it was just a year of bad luck, and finally something went his way, and his win allowed Team Penske to leave the season knowing that two of the three drivers won in 2025. Scott McLaughlin, the only Penske driver not to win this year, had to lead until he made a mistake and lightly slapped the wall with the right rear. Will Power made a big mistake on pit road, which ended up taking him out of contention. So Tanner, with 2 wins in the last 3 races to close of the year, is Team Penske finally showing signs that it can have a big bounce back year in 2026?
I certainly think so. It looked that Chevy finally got their act together after Indianapolis this season. It seemed like, outside of Power's, win at Portland in 2024, as well as Plato's win to kick off the hybrid era back at Mid-Ohio, it just seemed like they weren't able to put together the kind of runs necessary to, get them onto the top step of the podium. And I don't know what it was, but they finally got their act together after the Indy 500 and never really stopped. Obviously, they ran into the brick wall at times. That was Alex Palou and Barry Wanzer. But, for them to be able to grab a good few wins towards the end of the season, especially in the second half, was certainly a good sign for Chevy as a manufacturer going into 2026. As far as Team Penske is directly concerned, though, I feel like at the tracks that they won at and with the drivers that they won with, a lot of it depends on what their lineup looks like next year, in my opinion. I think that, obviously winning with Will Power are, really, really, we don't really know what's happening there with him. It could be David Malukas in the third Penske car, which I'm hoping they'll just renumber to 22 for, purposes of just giving Malukas his own identity at Penske compared to Will Power. But, if they don't end up coming back with Will Power next year, then I feel like that win isn't really, a sign of things to come for them necessarily. As far as Josef Newgarden's concerned, I think he finished the season strong. And no, I don't think it's a coincidence that he, had a lot of ovals in the second half of the schedule to help him bolster his points standing. But at the end of the day, he still had to go out and perform. And when it mattered most, and when he was probably in the most desperate state that he'd been in since he'd joined Team Penske, he was able to go out there and execute and get the win in his hometown. So I do think as far as the two program is concerned, they are going to be very thrilled with how the season ended up playing out, and are going to be getting another oval on the schedule next year in Phoenix, which again should kind of lend to Josef Newgarden's skill set. Looking ahead to next season for Penske, I think that it shapes up rather well for them. But again, without really knowing the future of their driver lineup, as well as knowing what the exact schedule is going to look like, I don't feel confident saying one way or the other whether they're going to be strong or whether they're not going to have, a great season. But as far as how their performance from 2025 leads up, they seem to have ramped up throughout the year and ended the year on a relative high note compared to the dour struggles that they had at the beginning of the year.
They have improved the Penske organization, especially after everything that went down in the month of May. They have been improving. Will Power showing what he could do at Portland, that if everything goes right, they are one of the harder teams to beat out there. We were seeing all three Penske drivers running really strong in Nashville up until we saw Will Power, a mistake on his part entering pit road, took him out of contention. Then it looked like Scott McLaughlin could have this. He goes in just a little bit wide, touches the wall, just enough for that caution, but already Newgarden had gotten around. And then it looked like maybe Palou had something for Newgarden. But I think at the end of the day, Newgarden was just unstoppable. Of course, a combination of dirty air, all sorts of factors that may have helped him. But still, Newgarden drove a good race, got himself in position. I know people are going to say, what if Pato O'Ward did not have a tire issue? Still, I feel pretty confident Newgarden could have found himself in a podium position, top four, turning things around. And I think overall, Team Penske, they have to feel pretty good. Last three races, they won two of them. They got to feel pretty good about that. Scott McLaughlin, he may be remembered as a driver that didn't win, but he could have easily won at Nashville. Who knows what would have happened at the Indianapolis 500 had he been able to race. He is a fast driver. I don't have any doubt in his ability to go out there in 2026, get a win. The big question mark, as you mentioned, Tanner, is that 12 car, maybe 22 car, which that's what Simon Pagenaud had as a number. What's going to happen with that? It really looks certain that Will Power knows this is the end. Nothing's been announced. We're going to be following that throughout the rest of the off season. I know you, Kobe, you're going to be following that for Grid tonight, but I think at the end of the day, Team Penske has to be motivated for 2026.
Yeah, certainly. I think Team Penske has to be really excited the way they ended the year. If they start off 2026 like how they ended this year and with the way they perform, I think you can see Team Penske in the mix to win week in and week out. And if they get the execution down, and then some luck fall their way, I think they'll be perfectly fine next year. With Josef Newgarden. Scott McLaughlin. No, he didn't get into victory lane this year, but I certainly think that he's going to be extra motivated, and he will probably more than likely win at least one IndyCar race in 2026. And who knows what's going to happen with the number 12 car, although we have a good idea of what's going to happen there, because looking at Will Power's situation, like you say, Joe, may fall on Grid tonight. I've actually been refreshing my social media timeline, wondering if we're going to get any news on this show today, since we've gone over an hour and 20 minutes at this point, because yesterday, Will Power told reporters that he's having a meeting with Roger Penske today about his future, because his contract actually expired after the checkered flag yesterday. So technically right now, unless they resign him, Will Power is a free agent, and Will Power will know his future today, but will the rest of the world know what Will Power's future is? That remains to be seen, if we'll get an announcement at some point today, tomorrow, later in the week, next week, or whenever. But it really does feel like that Will Power has driven his last race at Team Penske. Hopefully I'm wrong there, and he'll get at least another year in that car, because he's still performing at an extremely high level. But it really just seemed like the writing's been on the wall for quite a while for Will Power. We watched his interviews this weekend. He seemed very somber, and talked about all the great years he's had with Team Penske and Verizon. It seems like he knows what's going to happen. It's just a matter, of hearing it straight out of the captain's mouth himself, that we're sorry, that Will, we appreciate everything you've done for this organization, over the years, but it's time to move on and look at some of the younger talent in the series, like a David Malukas. So we thank you for your service, and now we're going with the younger guy who has a lot of potential to do some great things in this series for the years ahead. Yeah, so definitely going to be keeping an eye on the situation with Will Power. And also, if you heard Josef Newgarden yesterday after winning the race, he talked about Will Power as well, saying like when Will Power drove up to the front, he was thinking like, wow, Will Power, what a guy. Yeah, so even Josef Newgarden seems to know where this is going, with Will Power. But if you've seen the IndyCar and Fox social media page, Will Power, blowing off some steam and, some of the stress and not worrying about his future. He was on Broadway beating the drums last night, real nice to see that, despite, so many concerns about his future, that Will is still, out there having a good time and trying to enjoy life as much as you can. And we'll certainly keep an eye on Will Power's future, which we should know very, very imminently. And once we know Will Power's future, IndyCar silly season should kick into full swing. And it's really funny, because we've been talking about how there's really been nothing going on silly season-wise with most drivers locked in for next year. And if Will Power becomes available, then a lot of drivers whose rides were previously safe, not going to be safe anymore. Teams are going to be consulting with their lawyers and getting those buyout clauses exercised, because who wouldn't want to sign a Will Power to your organization? Could definitely change the trajectory of your program to get a mind like his, on your race team. And now just looking at the season as a whole, the 2025 NTT IndyCar Series season will be remembered, obviously, for the dominance of Alex Palou. Nobody really had anything for him this year. Palou executed, at every form of the game. He was obviously really good on the road in the street courses, but this year what really separated him, in this championship, was his massive improvement on the ovals. I mean, last year you could just say he was a above average, a good oval racer, but this year Alex Palou became a great oval racer and really showed a lot of great things on the ovals. And then you have to obviously look at some of the lows. Team Penske's, scandal at Indianapolis during the month of May, and an overall down year for the captain's organization. Although they did turn it on, here at the end. And then we already talked about him, Robert Schwartzman, a rookie, taking the pole for the greatest spectacle in race. Another great story. And then another low, the unfortunate turnout at Iowa Speedway. Not a good crowd size at all. And with talks of this potentially being the last IndyCar race at Iowa Speedway for the foreseeable future, plus the broadcast partner Fox Sports purchasing 1/3 of the series in the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And as we talked about on Grid Tonight recently, the new video game that iRacing is going to create based on the IndyCar series, the first video game in over 2 decades, coming in the second half of 2000 26. Also promising talks about next year's IndyCar schedule, about getting some new tracks on the schedule, another short oval, an oval before the Indy 500, and maybe a brand new international race, and potentially a street race in our nation's capital. So a lot to talk about there. And plus that memorable season finale we talked about at the top of the segment at Nashville. Joe, what will you remember from the 2025 IndyCar season? Will it ultimately be remembered in a positive light?
I think at the end of the day, it may not be exactly remembered as the most positive season. You're going to have to look into finding the positives, which, as you said, from what we saw when it comes to building up the sport for the future, with the video game, more races being included, the announcement of a new chassis coming. I think those are what going to stand out when it comes to the positives. The negatives, unfortunately, it seems like negative stories seem to linger much longer. People are going to remember the Penske's cheating scandal. They're going to remember. I know some people are just not a fan of seeing a driver dominate a series. That's part of motorsports. For IndyCar, especially since IndyCar is seen as such a competitive series, I think people are going to be talking about how Alex Palou dominated. I really hope there is no truth to the rumor about a playoff system in IndyCar. Please don't do it. Just please don't. I think in the IndyCar season, it is going to be remembered in that aspect where hopefully by the end of 2026, when it's going to be a positive season where we're talking about the growth of the series, the growth of the teams, I think this is where we're going to look back and say, but a lot of these accomplishments started during 2025. And that's why I think potentially 2025 will be remembered for the most.
Yeah, I feel like ultimately in the fan base, the 2025 season is going to be remembered mostly for Alex Palou and his exceptional run, not only to win 4 of the first 5 races of the season, which includes the Indy 500. But, obviously this is just part of a greater tear that he's been on, where he's now won 3 titles in a row and 4 in 5 years. I think that that'll ultimately be what the fan base remembers from it. But some of the other aspects of it, I think that we'll look back upon in a few years, is that I think that we're starting to finally see the rise of Arrow McLaren. I think that if you look at the point standings and just generally watch most of the races this year, you notice that the Christian Lundgaard number 7 McLaren was actually a fixture in most of the races this season. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that Alex Rossi came in and brought that team up relatively well, but I think that he kind of peaked there in terms of what he was capable of. So having Christian Lundgaard, a young, very fast racer, get into that car and really start to show improvement, not only on the ovals, but just being a bit more consistent in his finishes on the road and street courses, was certainly, something that should give them a lot of signs of promise going forward, especially when you consider, Pato O'Ward has been the banner driver of that team since joining them back in 2020. So going forward, obviously, I think that people will remember a lot of the, Penske cheating scandal thing that didn't even end up being actual cheating. What will be forgotten is that Andretti actually did cheat in the Indy 500 and got 2 of their cars from the top 6 disqualified. But again, no one's going to remember that. We're going to remember that Penske was fiddling with the attenuator in a way that didn't even give them a competitive advantage. With all that said, I think some other things that we'll take away from this season are Penske's just overall struggles, but how they were able to respond to them. Another thing that I think will go under the radar is the fact that we had another winless season from Colton Herta, and he's possibly going to be going to F2, maybe. We'll see. Maybe we'll see someone like Marcus Armstrong start to, really ramp up next year. Had a really solid points finish this year. Same with Felix Rosenquist. I think MSR, with their new alliance with Chip Ganassi Racing, I think that that'll only propel them forward in the future. And yeah, I think ultimately what we're going to remember not only is Alex Palou winning his title and his third in a row, his fourth overall. I think we're also going to remember this as being Will Power's swan song, perhaps with Team Penske. And if not, then we'll know it as a year that we stressed out all year long about where Will Power was going to go. And ultimately, it was all for nothing. So, hopefully, if we take one race away from this year as like a true classic, it was the Nashville finale. But I also felt that the Toronto race was really interesting, and hopefully, if they end up moving that race outside of Exhibition Place, it moves it to a place in that city or in that overall metropolitan area to a track that is just as good and provides just as much action.
Yeah, and the rumor with that, Tanner, they're looking at two different locations outside of the Toronto area. It looks like it could be like an abandoned airport or something. So we've talked about this, I believe, on Grit Tonight when this news dropped. It actually dropped live during our show that IndyCar was more than likely going to move outside of Exhibition Place in 2026. That they really wanted to keep Canada on the schedule, but because of the FIFA World Cup happening next summer, them utilizing downtown Toronto for that event, during that weekend, it'll be really hard to try to put on an IndyCar race when you're going to already have the city packed for, soccer fans from all over the world to see the World Cup. So it's not really feasible to, have it next summer at Exhibition Place. But yeah, I think one of the two places that they talked about, I think it was called Downsview Airport, and then a place in, I think, Buddenville. I might be wrong about that, but it was like two different places. I looked at images, of the airport and all of that, and kind of giving Burke Airport Cleveland vibes for all you nostalgic Cleveland fans out there who enjoyed watching IndyCar racing back in the day. So maybe we'll have a good race at one of the airfields that they could potentially utilize for next year's race in Canada. But I know we're going to talk about him in a little while once we talk about the grid ranking and the latest big update there. But I think the season obviously going to be remembered, when Alex Palou, when he went from being a great driver to an elite driver and one of the best that there is right now, and not just IndyCar, but in the world, that Alex Palou, shows that he is that guy, or as some people say, Alex Palou is him, because he really, took things to a new level this year. Him and Barry Wands, that number 10 team, they've been absolutely spectacular. And as I've said throughout the year, I think that IndyCar could potentially be witnessing, the new Jimmy Johnson and Jack Canals, type of duo that we saw, during that run of, 5 in a row and 7 Cup Series championships in NASCAR. Just like we say Jimmy and Chad, now you got Alex and Barry, because if they keep this team together, I think they can go on a run. I think he can win even more championships in a row. Like you may see a 7-time IndyCar champion in Alex Palou someday, or you even do a bit further, and get to 8. Who knows? Because this guy's not even 30 years old yet. And if you look at, Will Power, Scott Dixon racing into their mid-40s, if you look at Alex Palou now, he could race, another 10, 15, 16, 17 more years, and think about all the wins and championships he could accomplish, by then. So I think sky's the limit to Alex Palou. If he, for some reason, doesn't go off to F1, I think him and Chip Ganassi can go on a special run here, and it's really nice that we're able to witness this. So I think 2025 is ultimately going to be remembered by the year of dominance by Alex Palou, along with some of the other stories we have going on. Joey, I forgot to mention that, but I'm glad you brought up the point about the chassis. We've been begging for a new IndyCar chassis, not just us here, but the drivers, the teams have been begging for a new chassis forever, and it's nice that we finally have a timeline that we're a couple of years away from getting that, and hopefully the new chassis will be something that will produce great racing on all forms of tracks, and the drivers will finally have a car that they enjoy driving. Because if you listen to the drivers talk about the current chassis, a lot of them, don't necessarily, like they aren't in love with driving this car, because especially when you add the new hybrid, the car gets a lot heavier. And Tanner, we've talked about in this show numerous times all throughout the year, how it's changed, how some drivers have had to completely change their driving styles, especially those, who have been around in this series for a long time now, and how it is not really comfortable for them to be driving a car so heavy. And I remember last year during the off season, it was actually at the end of 2024, IndyCar sent the teams a rendering what the new car could look like. And then, according to Marshall Pruitt from Racer.com, basically those team owners' heads exploded because they did not like what they saw at all. So hopefully since then, they went back to the drawing board and, designed a car that people are like, yeah, that looks good and maybe it will race good. But yeah, I think, obviously every season, you're going to have your positives and you're going to have your negatives. But I certainly think there are some things, that IndyCar, the entire IndyCar paddock, IndyCar fans can be excited about heading into 2026. And I think that's a good way to end our IndyCar segment. So Tanner, let's talk about what happened at Zandvoort yesterday morning.
Indeed. Moving on to the Dutch Grand Prix, the first race of Sunday, it did in fact set a high bar with plenty of action and surprises. Oscar Piastri won the race from start to finish, but there was plenty of drama behind his rear wing, including his teammate Lando Norris's engine expiring and not finishing the race late in the event. Piastri now holds a 34-point lead over Lando, and with 9 races remaining, Norris said he must win every single race. Now that Norris cannot win and take the points lead, he needs Piastri to have bad luck. So, Kobe, starting with you, does this change Lando's approach going forward?
I said, well, I think there's going to be a lot more pressure on Lando because Oscar Piastri, if he continues the form that he's driving at, Oscar is just going to slowly keep increasing that points lead, and it's going to be harder for Lando, to catch him. I think that Lando's going to need to do 2 things. He's going to need to step up his game by a lot, and he's going to need to, take claim over Oscar Piastri. And with the way you see Oscar Piastri, winning poles in Grand Prix races now, you're going to need Lando Norris going to have to flip that. He's going to need to be doing what Oscar Piastri's doing, like almost every weekend from here on out until he at least, tries to catch him a little bit in the points or ends up overtaking him. I think he's also going to need luck on his hand. I think he's going to need Oscar, to either retire from the race or not have a great race and finish in the points when Lando, finishing at the very top step of the podium. So I think right now it's an unfortunate situation that Lando's in right now, but in order for him to catch up, he's gonna need Oscar Piastri to finish outside the points, and Lando's gonna need to get maximum points. But yeah, I think that the approach is he needs to go out there with a must-win mentality, from here on out to try to catch his teammate.
I would agree. I feel Lando is in that must-win situation, and you need Oscar Piastri to have bad luck. So I think this sort of makes it where for Lando Norris, this is going to be a really interesting challenge for him. Can he go out there, get the poles? If he's on the pole, starting ahead of Oscar Piastri, he already has 1 step ahead each and every race weekend. It's then a matter of executing the starts. If he could stay up ahead, that means he's going to have that preferred strategy compared to if he's behind Oscar Piastri. We saw throughout the race at the Dutch Grand Prix how Lando Norris had to be the car second in line to get the pit stops when they double stacked the pits with Piastri and then Lando. Now, thankfully, in both cases, they had such a big lead, safety cars where they were able to do that without compromising Lando's race that much. But still, you can't expect that every time you're behind your teammate, you're going to get the ideal strategy, the ideal treatment. So it's going to be a lot of work for Lando Norris. I think this will be a great test to see what he could do as a driver to step up, what he could do as a leader for his side of the garage to motivate them to get just the most out of the car and then just position himself to get the job done. I mean, even if he goes out there, wins every race, and Piastri finishes second place, that's going to be great for McLaren. Of course, Piastri will be thrilled that he'll be the champion. But I think at the end of the day, if that was to occur, Lando Norris has to hold his head high saying, hey, we put ourselves in a spot where we lost a championship, particularly early in the season, 2 races. This race didn't help, but we rebounded to get some great results. Bring on 2026.
Indeed. And, obviously you got to look at the stats with these two coming down this season. We've got 9 races remaining, and funny enough, Oscar Piastri has already scored more points this season than he did last year when he finished 4th in the championship. I think something that Piastri has done this season that has kind of gone under the radar is he only has 1 finish worse than 4th, and it was after he spun out and got beached at Australia in the grass and when it was raining. and he still came back to finish 9th in the points. He has no finishes outside of the points this season, whereas Lando now has 2 retirements at both Canada and here in Zandvoort. Obviously, both have had an incredible season to this point, and the championship is clearly going to come down to those two. Moving on to our next question, obviously the feel-good story of this weekend links back to Isaac Hadjar of the Racing Bulls, qualifying 4th and finishing on the podium. Unfortunately, he did break his trophy while celebrating, but what a turnaround from Australia where he crashed out on the formation lap. However, now he might be the one to silence the Alex Pelota Red Bull rumors that we've been seeing circulate over the past couple of weeks. Joe, does this podium put Hadjar in a prime position to take over the Red Bull seat?
It does. Normally, I would be happy for the driver. Like, congratulations, you're going to most likely move up, but this is the Red Bull team. This is the Max Verstappen Red Bull team. It's almost, oh boy, you're going to move up. I mean, what he has done to put on such a performance this year, when he crashed out on the pace lap at Australia, was devastated. My concern was, can he rebound from this? We've seen where sometimes a driver has such a disastrous start and they just seem to never get back, and then they get replaced mid-season. We saw that happen at Racing Bulls, particularly with Nick de Vries not too long ago. I thought that was going to be his fate. But then he started rebounding and just putting together what he needed to do. Good races, decent results. You're not going to shock the world in the Racing Bulls. You're not going to be content for podiums each and every week. But he's just been slowly getting better and better, outperforming Liam Lawson. Then we come into this race weekend, 4th place. This is where I thought it was going to be a real test for the team. That car doesn't exactly have the pace. The team needed to execute a great strategy, and they did that, holding behind not only the Ferraris when Charles Leclerc was there, but then the George Russell Mercedes. I mean, what an effort by this team to just execute. Isaac Hadjar executed. He showed what he could do. Now I think he's going to be forced to move up to the big team, which traditionally that is a big plus for anyone in their F1 career. We just know from our perspective, from the media side, the daunting task that is. But if Isaac Hadjar could overcome what he did this year, I think seeing how Red Bull now has new management, how potentially they might be moving away from, okay, we need to make a car better, and hopefully something where it could just help them get that constructor championship, so they need to make that second driver successful. He could potentially come at the right time, but it's just so hard to tell with that organization.
Yeah, you'd think a promotion, would be something to celebrate, but in this case, a promotion would actually be very depressing, for Isaac Hadjar or anyone. Like, just ask Yuki Tsunoda, he's been wanting to be, a Red Bull F1 driver for the longest time now, but after seeing how this season's gone, he probably wishes he had no hope for that promotion, because this is, completely derailed his Formula One career. But I think although people know that it's not Yuki the driver, that it's the car that's, extremely difficult to drive, and there's only one person in this world, as we've been saying all year long and last year as well, there's only one person in the world who can drive this Red Bull car, and it's Max Verstappen, and we haven't seen anybody remotely close to a bit near him in quite a long time, as we saw, Sergio Perez fell off in that car, towards the end of his tenure with the team. And right now, I don't really see, anyone who they could potentially put in this Red Bull car next year alongside Max Verstappen, other than Isaac Hadjar. Yeah, I know we've been talking about Alex Palou to Red Bull, for like the last couple of weeks or so. But honestly, I think the chances of that happening are extremely unlikely. A lot of people believe that that's extremely unlikely that Palou is going to leave. A good thing he has going in IndyCar to go to Red Bull, where he could become the next driver to get eaten up, chewed up, and spit out by Max Verstappen in that team. Yeah, so I think Isaac Hadjar is probably the safest option that they could go with right now, because I don't look for them to stick with Yuki Tsunoda. I don't look for them to, go back to Liam Lawson. I think that Isaac Hadjar is the next one up, and we don't traditionally see Red Bull, throw their young F2 drivers into the main team at first. I like to get them up to speed, with the Racing Bulls organization, and then as time goes on, they will promote them from there. But I would be really shocked if their young junior driver, Arvid Lindblad, was promoted to the Red Bull team straight out of F2, because that would be a lot of pressure on that young guy. Like even Max Verstappen, as great as he is and as highly touted as he was, coming out of the junior categories at 16 years old, they didn't even put Max Verstappen in the Red Bull team, at first, because that would not have been good for a young driver. They let him, cut his teeth a little bit, at the race, what's now known as Racing Bulls, before they promoted him to the senior team. So I would be surprised if they put Lindblad in the Red Bull F1 car right off the bat. But Hadjar, definitely a special moment for him, on the podium. As you guys mentioned, Australia, he was in tears, being consoled by Lewis Hamilton's father. Really upset to see his F1 debut go so terribly wrong, and now he's on the podium, with some of the best in the sport right now. So definitely a lot for him to be proud of, and we'll see what the future holds for him. And if it's a Red Bull seat alongside Max Verstappen, good luck, buddy. You're going to need it.
I kind of feel like we're kind of like NASCAR playoffsing this moment for Hadjar. Like, this is a big moment for him in his career, and I feel like we are kind of, hedging our bets on, like, is Red Bull going to just move him into that next car with that Max Verstappen in the number one? It just kind of feels like we're kind of raining on a good moment by bringing up something that will make everybody upset eventually. With that said, I think Hadjar is a special talent and clearly showed that he is worthy of being in Formula One this weekend. And hopefully, if he does get the call up to replace Yuki Tsunoda, he will go out there and perform. I do feel a bit bad for Yuki, to be honest. I feel like a lot of us were hoping that he would make the jump over to Red Bull at some point, and I feel like the returns have not quite been what we all thought they would be. But I think that has more to do with the car than it does the driver, unfortunately, and I feel like that would matter if it was Alex Palou or Isaac Hadjar in that vehicle. Moving on to our final F1 question. Obviously, we saw that Lando Norris's engine expired, but we also had two other DNFs in the Ferraris of Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc in separate incidents. Lewis Hamilton, when the track was starting to get a bit wet, got into that paint in one of the corners on the high side, and it just got out from underneath him, and he got into the wall. Unfortunately, his teammate Leclerc was battling Kimi Antonelli on fresh tires, and it was right after Charles had pitted, and the two collided, and Charles got the absolute worst end of it. Those incidents were able to give Mercedes a bit of a leg up in the Constructors' Championship. Now they're only 12 points behind Ferrari. So, Kobe, starting with you, do you sense that Ferrari is still the second best team, or do you feel like Mercedes is able to change that narrative in the final stretch?
When we're talking about second best team, I honestly think it just depends on a week, right? I think obviously McLaren is the hands down best team this year, and then you have Ferrari, Mercedes, and Red Bull. It just really depends on the weekend, in my opinion. Yeah, like one weekend you'll see Ferrari look really good. The next weekend is Mercedes, and then the weekend after that it'll be like Max Verstappen, and as a sole Red Bull. And just looking at the race Ferrari had, like, what a disaster, right? For Ferrari, they don't really have a lot of good things to be excited about heading to their home race. Monza, Temple of Speed, the Tifosi's probably feeling really sad today because of how that race went for them. Lewis Hamilton, he was talking about before the break how he feels like that he was the problem with the team as a driver for not being able to do anything, and then to go out there make that mistake, get into the wall and crash out. Yeah, unfortunate for him, because I'm sure that's not going to do much for the confidence that he's lost throughout the year. And then, Charles Leclerc, a real unfortunate situation there, with young Kimi Antonelli, just completely cleaned him out there. And Antonelli as well, he's someone who started off his F1 career really strong, and then he's just kind of like falling off a cliff and looked like the rookie that he is. I know Jacques Villeneuve's, really critical of him on Sky Sports this weekend. Jacques Villeneuve went as far to say, when talking about Antonelli's struggles this year, he said maybe F1 is just too much for him. And I think we also need to consider, and Antonelli, yes, he's kind of been rushed up through the system to get to F1, and we were wondering if he was ready for this moment. It looked like early on, that we were wrong when we were questioning if Mercedes made a mistake to promote him so soon after rushing him through the junior categories, and it just hasn't been going well for him. Lately it ended on a sour note before the summer break, and coming out of the summer break, still not going well for young Antonelli. So hopefully he'll be able to turn things around, and show some of the promise we saw early on in the year. And Ferrari, they're going to need a quick reset, as heading into Monza, because this is, a huge race for the Prancing Horse.
This is going to be a big race for the Ferrari team. I think overall the Ferrari team, this will be the test of, are they still that second best team? This is Monza, their home country. Overall, I feel Ferrari, Charles Leclerc was having a good race, and Anton Campanelli had that issue, got into him, took him out. Lewis Hamilton is getting a little too high into that painted area, losing it, crashing out. I haven't given up on the Ferrari team yet. I still think they're probably the second best, just because George Russell is doing a lot of the heavy lifting around Mercedes to keep them competitive. Just going to be a matter of what happens at Monza. I think that'd be a good indicator. And as we close the season out in F1, once we see that race, I think that will be a matter of, okay, this is where the teams are standing, really. We got that final stretch. There to go, because we still have a couple high-speed tracks like Las Vegas. That's going to be a good spot for Ferrari. The technical courses, especially Brazil, that always seems to be a strength for Mercedes. It could be a fun fight to the very end.
Indeed, it could. And, as we converge towards the end of the season here, it seems like everything is kind of up in the air outside of the McLarens winning everything. So with that in mind, obviously, Joe, we're going to toss it back over to you. What happened in the World Rally Championship?
World Rally Championship, Rally Paraguay, we saw essentially Sebastian Ogier, who started off as, I'm running part-time, come back, decides I'm going to be running full-time now, contend for the championship. Well, it looks like it's starting to pay off. He went out there, got the win, and gained points in the World Rally Championship driver standing. Elfyn Evans was second, and the defending series champion, Thierry Neuville, placed third. So the top three in World Rally Championship are only separated by 9 points, with Evans 7 points ahead of Rovanperä, and Ogier, who is 9 behind Evans. So 3 Toyota drivers going for it. There's only 4 races remaining. Rally Chile is next for World Rally Championship. And of course, Ogier, he is still in the grid ranking top 10. But for the first time, the grid ranking has been clinched before hitting that week 30 mark. Alex Palou has clinched the 2025 grid ranking. 8 wins, 13 podiums, 14 top 5s, 15 top 10s in the 17 races. That's a 80% and greater rate for top 5 and top 10 finish rates. His score of 21.60, that's the second highest score by a grid ranking world champion, second to Max Verstappen in 2023 with a 23.49. Now, since Alex Palou in 2021, he has finished in the grid ranking every year with a top 10 in 2021, 2023, 2024, and of course 2025. He was in the top 20, but outside the top 10 in 2022. Third consecutive top 5 finish for Alex Palou in the grid ranking. Of course, additionally, the rumors have been dispelled that Palou was on Red Bull's list of drivers to replace Yuki Tsunoda. So Alex Palou becomes your newest grid ranking world champion. Big congratulations to him, especially for IndyCar championships this year. He is doing a lot at a young age of 28 years old. He doesn't get the record for the youngest grid ranking world championship. But Kobe, I got to say, from 2020, the year we went on the air, Alex Palou was starting off with Dale Coyne Racing. Now he is being compared, seen as one of the best drivers in the world, dominating a series that is ultra competitive, the NTT IndyCar series. How impressed are you with Alex Palou's rise from 2020 with Dale Coyne Racing to now one of the best racers in the world?
Yeah, Alex Palou's journey is real interesting, right? Because in 2019, he was racing in a highly respected series in Japan called Super Formula. Ran extremely well in that championship, won a race in his long season there, and then after performing extremely well in Super Formula, he moved over to the NTT IndyCar Series in 2020. 2020 was a really crazy year, with the pandemic and all of that, and we saw a condensed schedule. And Alex Palou, he couldn't have been thrown in a much worse situation than he was, because in 2020, guess what the first race of the season was? We were on a mile and a half at Texas Motor Speedway. Yeah, so can you imagine, coming from a world of road and street course racing like Alex Palou, and your first race is on a high-speed oval when you're going like over 210, 215 miles per hour, turning left for the very first time in your life at a track like this? I can't think of a more, grueling track to debut at, than Texas Motor Speedway. Yeah, but he handled his rookie year, the best way he could. I think he certainly, overperformed in many respects in that car his rookie year. And then he's talked about the story how he introduced himself to Chip Ganassi later that year, and he told Chip that, hey, I want to drive for your team. Then Chip ended up signing him for 2021. And in his very first race as a Ganassi driver, Alex Palou got his first career IndyCar win in the season opener in 2021 at Barber Motorsport Park. And, that was just a sign of things to come. Obviously, Palou won first start with Ganassi, and basically the rest is history. His only down year with the organization was a fifth place finish in the points in 2022. But, we can obviously argue that the lawsuit, with McLaren, and Ganassi was, a big distractor for him during that 2022 season, because he did not look like himself at all. And if he hadn't won the season finale in 2022, he would have had a winless season despite running, very consistently that year. And even in victory lane at the end of that season, Laguna Seca, I remember it was kind of awkward, because he didn't know what his future was going to hold. But Ganassi and Palou, they let bygones be bygones. And since then, they've won 3 in a row, and nobody's been as good as Alex Palou in the NTT IndyCar Series. And as I've been saying, look like this guy can go on a run for quite a while now. Sky's the limit of how many races that he can win or how many championships that he can win. I think he can, continue to add to his legacy. And it's crazy because if Alex Palou, not even 30 years old, you say Joe's 28 right now, from Spain. If Alex Palou retired from the IndyCar Series right now, he would already, be one of the legends of the sport. It's really crazy that he's already a living legend. And from now, he's accomplished multiple IndyCar championships. Now he's got an Indy 500 crown on his mantle as well. So the only thing Alex Palou can do right now is just keep stacking those wins, keep stacking championships, Indy 500s, more race wins. There's just a lot more that he can continue to add to an already impressive resume. It's really crazy. In 2020, when Dale Coyne Race announced that they signed this guy who competed in Super Formula, I was wondering, like, who in the world is Alex Palou? Everybody else was wondering who he was. We were mispronouncing his name. We were calling him Alex Palou because we didn't even know anything about him. And for some reason, Chip Ganassi still calls him Palou. I still don't know how many years in now why Chip Ganassi doesn't understand how to pronounce his driver's name, but that's a story for another time. But I think it's really crazy how we went from, just a few years ago, I had no idea who this guy was. And now everybody knows who Alex Palou is right now. Just really amazing to see the run that he's been on.
Yeah, I feel like in the world of auto racing, we don't really see someone really rise up from being a relative nobody to being an all-conquering, superhero. I mean, the dude went from relative obscurity, as Kobe laid out, running in Super Formula, which is kind of a niche racing series, to being arguably one of the greatest IndyCar drivers that's ever lived before the age of 30. You just don't see things like this very often. I think the only thing it's really comparable to is like Jimmy Johnson in NASCAR, which is, obviously very interesting considering their time together spent at Chip Ganassi Racing, especially as Palou is starting to develop. If you look back at Johnson's career, he got his start in, stadium super trucks, which, obviously isn't like the biggest racing series in the United States by any stretch. And then eventually transitioned to running the ASA late model tour, where he was, pretty decent, but the equipment never really matched up with his talent. Same goes for when Herzog moved up to the Xfinity series. And, Johnson was a relatively obscure driver there as well. Obviously did get 2 top 10 points finishes, but this was in a time where a lot of the competitive seats were filled mostly by other Cup Series competitors running part-time schedules. So it wasn't truly indicative of what your speed was week to week where you finish in the point standings. And then all of a sudden this guy gets a contract with Hendrick Motorsports and a new 4th entry for the team, and then lights the world on fire, becomes the first rookie since Red Byron to lead the point standings, and absolutely kept that same pace up for 15 consecutive years. And if we're in for that same amount of domination in IndyCar, then I think it's better to get prepared for it now than, continue to wait for somebody to stop it. It's just so fascinating to see someone who, as Kobe mentioned, his very first IndyCar race meant him going to a daunting track like Texas Motor Speedway and trying to compete there. It's just insane to see him in 5 years go from relative obscurity, doesn't really have much of an oval background, and to go from being in Dale Coyne the 1 year and take that team to a podium at Road America in the same race that his future car ended up winning is, certainly a really interesting bit of foreshadowing. Like, I think a lot of people had a lot of question marks when Palou replaced Felix Rosenqvist in 2021 after Rosenqvist had a really decent campaign in the 10 car in 2020 that included that win at Road America. But at the end of the day, you can't really say that move for Chip Ganassi didn't pay off. They've obviously had an exceptional partnership together that has endured a number of bumps and bruises along the way, specifically in the 2022 and the beginning of the 23 racing seasons. But they were able to put their differences behind them and really lock in, and they haven't really come out of that locked-in phase in the last 3 years. To go on a run of 3 straight titles, I mean, in any motorsport, we don't really see that happen. Really, in any sport, period, we don't really see that happen. So for him to put himself among the likes of, the Michael Jordans of the world, we've never seen it in the American football NFL. We just don't see this in sports very often, but to put himself in the company of people like Michael Schumacher, Jimmy Johnson, Cale Yarborough, all these great competitors, Lewis Hamilton, that have all gone on these exceptional runs is really just a sight to behold. And we've got to remember, he's only 28. He's the same age as me. Like, he's got a long future of motorsports ahead of him, and he's already a 4-time title winner. Who's to say how many more he's going to stack up before he's done? It's just been exceptional to watch, and he is absolutely an incredible talent, and it's a good thing that Dale Coyne took a chance on him in 2020, and then Chip Ganassi further took a chance on him in 2021, because we could have just lost him to, God knows what at this point, because he didn't really have a whole lot of funding coming into his career. So all that to say, got to tip your cap to Alex Palou. The man has really and truly taken the most advantage of every opportunity he has been given, and has become one of the greatest drivers probably in IndyCar history, and he's not even 30 years old.
It is so crazy to say he's not even 30 years old and what he has accomplished already. And then, of course, with the grid ranking, the company he is with, from the Marc Marquez, Max Verstappen, Shane Van Gisbergen, Sebastian Ogier, Lewis Hamilton, and he's the first one from IndyCar to do this. I think it really shows traditionally how IndyCar, they may have 1 or 2 drivers in the top 10. Alex Palou has been consistently in the grid ranking since 2021, his first season with Chip Ganassi Racing. It's just amazing what this driver has accomplished in his career. Looking forward to 2026, seeing how the NTT IndyCar season is going to shape up, and of course, who will be leading week 1 on that first Sunday of April. Well, Kobe, we're at the 2-hour mark. Time to shut it down. So I'll hand it to you for our one shining moment.
Yeah, and I also like to shut down my list because I'm really tired. But yeah, it's time for our Grid One Shining Moment from this racing weekend. Yeah, let us know if you're watching here live or on replay. What's the one thing that stood out to you from this racing weekend? Whether it was the World Rally Championship in Paraguay, IndyCar at Nashville, F1 at Zandvoort, or NASCAR at Darlington, let us know. Tanner, what's your one shining moment?
Gotcha. So while I could talk about Josef Newgarden finally breaking through this season to finally get that long-awaited victory at home, I'm actually going to shift back over to NASCAR and talk about Legacy Motor Club. I know I gushed about them earlier, and I'm going to do it a little bit more. For this team that, piddled around last year without any data, any notebook, you've really got to hand it to them for how well that they've come out this season, even if their points position doesn't exactly tell the whole story. Legacy Motor Club's drivers Eric Jones and John Hunter Nemechek have definitely shown up this year, and they've been exceptional in helping build this team back up to, heights that it hasn't seen in quite some time. I mean, you look back at the entirety of the playoff format since its inception, I can't think of one time that Legacy Motor Club has had like the consistency or the speed to really be considered like a playoff threat. And that even extends back to when they were known as Richard Petty Motorsports and onward. So it's been really encouraging to see Jimmy Johnson come in and inject that team with a whole bunch of cash and a whole lot of folks that, really know how to get the job done. And I'm really excited to see what the rest of this season in 2026 is going to look like for Legacy Motor Club. As I said earlier, I think that they have a really, really good shot of going out there and contending for wins next year and possibly landing themselves in the playoffs on points if they're able to put together a strong enough season. I still think that they have a long ways to go on road courses and, obviously some of the like smaller tracks where they have the reduced diffuser on the back of the next-gen car. But at the end of the day, coming out and landing 2 top 5s at Darlington, of all places, in the Southern 500, easily the most grueling race on the NASCAR calendar, is really a massive statement from Jimmy Johnson, Richard Petty, and that entire Legacy Motor Club bunch. And I think that they're going to be using that momentum to propel them forward.
That was a great shining moment. My shining moment is going to be a little bit different, but I have to say it's going to be going to whoever came up with the idea much earlier in the year for IndyCar to come up with the 3 Super Bowl ads featuring Alex Palou, Pato O'Ward, and Josef Newgarden. Of course, Super Bowl, a lot of people watching that saw those 3 drivers. While Josef Newgarden may have not gotten the wins, his season, the struggle, that was a storyline that I think a lot of people follow, and then he ends the season with the win. Pato O'Ward, most popular driver, podiums, goes out there, gets wins, fighting for the lead, a great season overall. And then Alex Palou, we've already talked enough about how dominant he was. It's important, and we've heard it from other series, to have your top stars be competitive, be doing good, keep the fans engaged. To have those 3 drivers have the same retention of fan interest from the dominance of Palou, the struggles of Newgarden, and Pato O'Ward. Now anyone that had learned about this series from those 3 ads can talk about what those 3 drivers did. Okay, Newgarden had a bad year, Palou was monstrous good, and Pato O'Ward had some great races. They're going to be excited for 2026. I cannot wait for the 2026 season to see how these 3 drivers will do, how every driver, especially all the drivers like Will Power, Marcus Ericsson, some of the younger drivers that are starting out, how they're going to perform. So my shine mode, whoever came up with that ad and featured those 3 drivers, because I feel those 3 drivers at least delivered when it comes to getting fan interest and delivering some storylines throughout the year.
And before I came on air today, I wanted to look and see how far away March the 1st was, when IndyCar kicks off the 2026 season on the streets of St. Pete. For anyone counting, we have half a year to go until the next IndyCar race, and that's a total of 181 days. So we still have a long, long, long way to go until the IndyCar series is back in action. And my one shining moment comes from IndyCar. Got to give a call to Josef Newgarden, for persevering, through the tough year that he's had. He's gone through a lot of, ups and downs this year, mostly downs. And for him to finally close the deal, win at home, it was just really special for him, and I'm genuinely happy for him because it's been really, sad to see one of the guys who's been one of the faces of the series in IndyCar for the longest time, go through such a terrible year with everything, just going completely wrong for him, and for him to come out there, and do what he did yesterday. Yeah, it didn't look like he had the best car, during the first half of the race, but he got out front, when it mattered the most, and looked like the oval master that we've seen in the years in the past. And I think that this is gonna be really good for Josef Newgarden's morale heading into the 2026 season. And I already predicted it, I believe, last show or the show before last on Wrap Up when we were talking about IndyCar. I think next year is going to be the bounce back year of Josef Newgarden. I think that he's going to be back in championship contention. I don't know if he'll win the championship, but I certainly think he'll win multiple races and he'll get closer to being that guy that we've always seen. I think that this year, just going to end up being, an asterisk of, just not a really good year for him because, we see that from time to time again with drivers. And I think next year he's going to be back in one of the top drivers in the series and in contention. And it was really interesting, reading the Indy Stars article this morning about Josef Newgarden written by Nathan Brown. I was really surprised that there were a number of people in the IndyCar paddock allegedly saying they thought Josef Newgarden might retire after such a bad year. I didn't really believe that personally, that he would retire, coming off, a really terrible year. If there were any talks about that, maybe just out of frustration because of nothing going right. But Josef, what he plans to do for the next 6 months, according to Nathan's article, that he plans to go away for the next 181 days, and during that time away, he just wants to start to miss IndyCar racing again. I think being able to decompress will be really good after the year that he's had. But hey, at least got to win at the end of the year, and you don't have to go into the next year answering questions coming off a winless season. So tip my hat to Josef Newgarden ending the year on a positive note.
Ended the year on a positive note for Josef Newgarden. I would find it, while those rumors were swirling, I just don't see that. I think he wants to come back, especially win that Indy 500. But it's going to be very interesting to see how the news from Penske turns out. Of course, we've been on the air 2 hours. We've been checking if any update, no update from the Penske organization or Will Power. But if there is an update, for sure, Kobe Grid tonight with Matt White and Joshua Birch will be on the air Wednesday. We still have Grid Encore later today. I know Kobe's going to be on that program, so we're going to wrap it up here shortly. A big thank you to our Patreon investors, Colin Deschelle, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew for investing in the Grid Network. Be sure to see our coverage from the Portland race weekend. That includes visiting gridnetworktv.com for our Grid Shots photo gallery, plus Matthew Bro's article recapping the Southern 500, and then across social media, especially Instagram, TikTok, some of our content there from Portland International Raceway. And again, a big thank you to everyone tuning in and supporting us. Hit that bell icon to not miss any notification because we're going to be on the air later today. For Kobe and Tanner, I'm Joe. Thank you for watching. We'll see y'all next time.